this episode of Star Wars Generations. I am the resident grumpy old fogey, Matthew, they, them pronouns.
Hi, I'm Erin, the youngest of the crowd, she, her pronouns.
And hey, I'm Alex. I guess I'm the middle child here.
There we go. Well, today we are going back into my childhood. We are talking about A New Hope, the movie that started it all. Episode 4, but first in our hearts, first in the American League. No, wait, that's the Nationals. Anyway, last in the American League. No one gets that joke. The point being, we are talking about Star Wars A New Hope. We're often going to do plot summaries, but for this one, I think most of you, if you listen to this podcast, have probably seen it. If not, pause, go watch it, make all your comments, come on back. Let's just start, folks, by... We're going to try and have a little bit of a framework as we talk about these things, instead of just us babbling incoherently about what we like and don't like. So we're always just going to start out by, how did we feel going into this movie? Because I think some of us may have watched it recently, some of us may be a while since we watched it. Erin, starting with you, kind of what was your thoughts as you sat down to watch this movie?
Okay, so I started watching it yesterday as I was getting ready. I had a event called the Boba Fetish Ball. I was performing on aerial silks, so I was getting ready as C-3PO. And I kind of watched the first half, but I was like doing my makeup, so I didn't really watch it. And then I was like, no, I need to watch this film. So I got up early today after I got home at 3 a.m. And just watched it through. And I was sitting there and I just like, the Lucasfilm kind of logo shows and the music comes in. I was like, yes. And then my dad came downstairs and I kept just saying, like, pausing it. I'd be like, this is such a good film. Like, this is just such a good film. Like, it's a beginning, a middle, and end, and it's all good. The characters are amazing. Like, the special effects, well, not special effects, the practical effects hold up. Like, it's just, yeah, it's a timeless film. It's a classic.
Yeah. Alex, what about you? How'd you feel going into it? And I guess we're also doing, what'd you pick up on the rewatch?
So I think I had mentioned on the previous episode that I am a frequent rewatcher of the movies. So I think the last time I watched it was probably like 2 months ago. But I kind of went into it with a little extra excitement because I wasn't just going to watch it. I was going to like take notes and like really pay attention to like little details more so than I think I have in a while. Like I tend to, since I've watched the movie so many times, I really just go in like, oh, I've seen it. I can like, you know, kind of check in and out and I'll still know exactly what's going on. But this time I was like, no, I need to pay laser close attention so I can have a conversation about it. And it made me just reappreciate every aspect of the movie and just the genius behind this being, you know, so revolutionary at the time. And it just got me super excited. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, it's always funny for me when I sit down to analyze something that I've mostly just loved. And I had that same kind of feeling. I had to kind of stop myself from just getting lost in the like, oh my God, and really think about it. But I think, yeah, sitting back down, I think I had some nervousness because, again, I'm always curious what folks of like different, you know, who experience the movies in different ways than I have think about it. But I know we'd just done our rankings, and so I had a good idea where you all were coming from. And I think mostly what I was struck by in this rewatch was how many of the details of this movie have been filled in by the prequels and by some of the novels, and how some of them really work and really add to the story, and some of them really don't, and kind of like feel like glaring plot holes now that I'll maybe talk about a little now or a little bit at other times. But yeah, it is still probably it is my favorite Star Wars movie, and it's just there was just so much to sink into. And it isn't just going to be a love fest, though. We're going to talk about things that we love, things that we didn't love. We're going to kind of go in order with some different ways of looking at it. And one of the things that we're going to start with, actually, that Alex suggested is hot takes. So I'm going to throw out a hot take. That's one of the things that I will be a little bit, like, it's not critical of, but it's one of those things that when you think about it more, which is that this is my favorite space battle in Star Wars, perhaps my favorite space battle anywhere. And yet it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The trench run is an amazing visual, but there's no reason why they couldn't just fly straight at a 90-degree angle right at that exhaust port. None whatsoever. The whole thing of like, there's one spaceship ahead and then there's others behind and the TIE fighters behind them. And the ones behind keep saying like, you know, like, I don't know how much longer I can hold them. you're literally doing nothing but being target practice.
That is exactly what my dad said as I'm watching it. He's like, what do you mean hold them? You don't even have rear deflectors. What are they doing? Nothing.
Like, all you're doing is providing an alternate target, which is useful in the sort of like, have 3 friends to go shark hunting, because as long as you're the fastest, you're okay.
Yikes.
But like, to me, it's very much one of those, like, when you really think about it, it makes no sense whatsoever. But it's, to me, a good movie is one where you get me so enraptured in the moment that I don't think about that. I've seen a lot of superhero movies or space battle movies or whatever where it's not quite grabbing me enough that I think about those things in the moment. I've never sat and thought about them in the moment, but definitely I think so. That's my hot take, is that it's a great space battle, but it makes no sense whatsoever.
So valid. Alex, yours?
Yeah, I was actually kind of struggling with my hot take, even though no one suggested this section of the thing. But I think that the thing that like kind of gets me the most about this movie, and this might be a hot take, I don't know, but it feels like it might be the least emotional Star Wars movie that exists. And what I mean by that is we you see Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen die. You see Alderaan get blown up. You see Biggs die up in the sky. You see all these death, all this awful. Not a single tear is shed. No one mourns. Leia doesn't even look that upset when Alderaan gets blown up. Luke just kind of looks at the skeletons of his aunt and uncle and then just go, all right, old man, come with you. Like, no thought, no mourning. One of Luke's best friends is killed right behind him in the trench run. No emotion before or after, just immediate celebration. R2 shot to hell. Luke's just like, he'll be fine. Immediately goes to like party, and like I feel like in the other Star Wars movies, they give a moment at least to breathe, to mourn, to like have it, and it felt like this movie. There's so many sad things that happen, but I don't feel the emotion as much as I feel like I should, and so I feel like Luke has kind of failed on that. That's my take.
So one thing I think that can be hard to understand is that this movie is made in a long ago time before emo, when people could subtly express emotions and people could recognize that.
Yikes.
Apparently it is a hot take because I've upset Matthew.
Yeah, you succeeded.
I think it's interesting, and especially because I would say I think part of what I don't like about so much the prequels is it feels very overacted and over emotive. And I think that's just an interesting, because to me, you're saying that, I'm like, there's so much pain on Leia's fate. Like, I was like amazed at Carrie Fisher's reactions to Alderaan. It's subtle, but it's there. And the way, Luke has to take a moment to collect himself after Biggs is killed and then be able to keep flying. And so, yeah, I'm not doubting that take at all. I just think it's interesting because to me, I would say very much the opposite. Like, this is the one where I think I cry so many times while watching this movie.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. If my entire family and all of my friends were killed in one shot, I think I'd react a little stronger than a brief facial expression that Leia had. And I don't buy into it. I don't buy into the pain, Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I am of the age where I like to be super emotive. Maybe it's just because I'm a Cancer. But yeah. I don't know, in the prequels, like you said, there's a lot more overt emotion. And even in the sequels, there's a lot more overt emotion. And I just felt like with the amount of genocide going on in this film, there's no reaction to it in or at least the reactions are so subtle that they feel misplaced in a way. I don't know. Aaron, do you agree with anything?
I see both sides of this because I agree watching it, especially when I was younger, none of the deaths hit me because when you're younger, I feel like when you don't understand things very well, you rely more on understanding other people's reactions to the event. Mm-hmm. And like you're saying, Matthew, like you're both saying, the reactions aren't huge, they're very subtle. And I think you could argue either way, especially for Leia's reaction, because this is a 19-year-old senator who has now withstood Darth Vader's torture and interrogations for a day or two, however long that period of time is. She's got it on lock. She can shut that shit down. And she needs to look strong, so she's gonna be strong. And then when she gets to Dantooine, and some captain runs up and is like, oh my gosh, I heard about Alderaan. Like, I'm so glad you're safe. And she says, like, no time for mourning. Like, we got to go. And so in that case, I see it as someone who's now kind of shutting down and focusing on the goal rather than being overwhelmed by their emotions. Like, she's kind of pushing it down.
Yeah. I think I definitely see that. And especially, like, there is a meme that went around about the scene where she is confronting Luke, where it's like, yeah, my entire planet just got destroyed, but the guy you knew for 36 hours got killed. Let's focus on your pain. And I agree with that. And to be clear, Alex, my point wasn't to make fun of your
no, I know.
I think that, to me, I think it's just I don't think that the movie makers were trying to say, like, oh, we are intentionally damping down the emotion they're feeling, except for the point that, Aaron, you're talking about. I think it's just a very different style of movie making.
That's
where
fair.
I think, like, that was considered a very emotive, like, you know, how angry Luke gets and kind of losing control of himself when he's been this meek, mild-mannered guy when Obi-Wan is killed. You know, I think there's a lot of things that show a lot of emotion. It's just not in the ways we're used to today.
Yeah, the last thing I just want to say on that, I think what makes it's made it harder for me over the years to buy into it, actually, is the fact that we've hashed out Anakin as such an emotional person, and you also see Padme as being super emotional, both in the Clone Wars. Well, Padme is more put together than Anakin is by a mile, of course, but they both emote very openly, I feel like, throughout the Clone Wars and the prequels. And I know they weren't raised by them, but, like, their children just being so stone cold just feels more distant to me, I guess, is the more I connect with the Skywalker family. I don't know.
That's fair. No, it's cool. I just don't, like, with Leia, I see it, and I think that what Aaron says is in. I just don't see Luke as stone cold at all. But I totally hear what you're saying.
That's fair. Aaron, what's your hot take?
Yeah, so my hot take, maybe it's not that hot, but I truly do believe that C-3PO may be the most emotional person in Star Wars. Like, he do be a droid, yes. But every 30 seconds, where's R2? Is R2 okay? R2, you better come back. I'm going to be so bored without you. I need someone to yell at. Oh my God, R2, is he going to leave? Is he going to live? Somebody save him. Like, I just think it's so sweet. They just are life partners in my eyes.
But then 3PO also just, R2 and 3PO are also just shitting on each other constantly.
Yep. Constant attacks.
Don't you dare call me a mindless philosopher, you.
Bucket of
bullets, yeah.
First of all, totally agree. And as someone with anxiety, I think many of us identify very strongly with C-3PO. Because as you were saying that, I was like, is anxiety an emotion? I guess it is. Yes. But also, during the break, during the strike, when I was looking for, like, Star Wars related content that wasn't struck, so I looked to a lot of foreign media, non-American and non-Hollywood. One of the things I watched was a movie called The Hidden Fortress, which is it's a samurai movie from the 1950s, Japanese made, that is was said to be very strongly influential on Lucas in the making of this movie. And the art, like, two of the main kind of, like, not heroes of the movie, but the people through whom, like, the kind of the protagonists of the movie are these two ne'er-do-well villagers whose town gets attacked and they run away. And then while running away, they argue over what direction they should go, and they decide to split up, but then they both get captured by the same people and meet each other back in the prison that they've been captured. Like, almost shot for shot of the C-3PO R2 stuff. And there's a lot of other ways the movie connects. It was just, that was a really fun thing to see.
That is cool.
What do we love about this movie?
Alex, what calls to you?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think what I love about this movie is, honestly, every time I watch it, I'm just impressed and blown away by the ingenuity of it all. So because I'm also a photographer, I'm an ultra film nerd as well. I've done a lot of research in the past on how they actually made this movie, and a couple little fun tidbits for y'all that you guys might know, or y'all might know, but I'm not sure if our crowd will know, if our listeners will know. But in order to, like, film the space battles, Lucas had to basically employ people to build an entire new camera and camera rig he wanted to match the feel of, like, actual footage from World War II that was taken in, like, planes, and that wasn't possible at the time. And so they had to literally invent new cameras, new technology, and like Star Wars almost failed so many times. So many people Fox wanted to pull funding a million times over, and yet during all of the hardships of funding and no support, being made fun of, Lucas just kept on chugging along and making these technological advancements and created this absolute masterpiece of a movie that every time I watch, I'm like, the fact that this was made in 1977 is mind-boggling to me, because you look at other space movies from the era, they're nowhere near the level of complex and not only just technologically but story-wise, because it would have been easy for Lucas to really fall on just, I'm gonna make this a super technical and cool looking movie, but he didn't do that. Like, he made it cool and amazing, but he also like really laser focused on the story, and you know, and I know that I still believe that Revenge of the Sith is the most complete story, but I also recognize that this is probably right next to it as the most complete story in Star Wars, because like Matthew said last time, it was the only one they made where they didn't know if there was ever going to be another one. Like, there's a very clear middle, beginning, end, a beautiful arc. And I think that like it's done, the storytelling is done in such a successful way, because you're really just from the beginning thrown into the middle of it, and you have no idea what's going on, and you're just kind of forced to piece it together as you go along. And for me, that's just such a compelling way of telling a narrative. So I think that as I watched it, you know, I was just lost in the narrative, as I always am, but I was really paying attention to a lot of the technical feats that I just, to this day, cannot believe that a bunch of people pulled off in the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. Growing up, my mother always used to rant about how this movie should have won the Oscar for Best Picture, in part because of that. Because, like you know, the movie that won instead, Annie Hall, was a really good movie, but was like, you know, it was people talking in rooms, and like that had been done a million times before. This was just so innovative and different.
Can I say one more quick thing, Matthew? Yeah. I have a visceral hatred and refuse to watch Annie Hall because of the fact that it stole the Oscar for Best Picture from A New Hope, because Star Wars won like everything else, and then it turns out that Woody Allen, the guy who made Woody Allen, right, the guy who made Annie Hall, is a creep and an awful freaking human being, and it makes me just viscerally hate it even more. And I'm just like, Star Wars should have won. It was so revolutionary above anything else, but the Academy is stupid apparently.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah, and growing up as a Jew. Growing up in New York City with a Jewish family, I was kind of contractually obligated to watch a lot of Woody Allen films, and I do enjoy quite a lot of them, but of course feel very differently about him now that we know what we know. Getting back, though, to this movie, for me, what I think I really loved watching it this time was the dialogue. And some of the dialogue in this movie feels a little, like, affected sounds like a negative word, and I don't mean it that way, but it's a little like they're really writing the hell out of it in ways that I don't see in a lot of the other movies. And I'm thinking of lines like, don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed.
Yeah.
The ability to destroy a planet, or even the ability to destroy a planet, is insignificant next to the power of the Force. And Mos Eisley Spaceport, you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. Mm-hmm. We must be cautious. There are just like so many like incredible lines like that I think if someone said to me just in normal day, I'd be like, what are you on? But they work so well in this movie, and it just. I don't think we get much of that in some of the other movies, and maybe that's actually better because it's a little over the top, perhaps. But from Vader and Obi-Wan especially, it just feels so good.
Even with Tarkin and Leia, there's an interaction when they first see each other, and she's like, Governor Tarkin, I should have known, or I think I smelled your foul stench when I got on board. And like it's such like a petty conversation, and like the back and forth, you know. You don't know how much it hurt me to have to sign your execution order. And it's just like it feels like very refined, but like verbal sparring. I totally get what you're going for there.
Yeah, very much so.
You kind of just said what I was gonna say, but yeah, it's literally like a dance. It's like fencing. Yes. Like they're battling through words, and it's so beautiful. Like the two lines you mentioned, Matthew. Like they sound odd. It's not something any of us would probably ever say, but those are fire lines. Like, that is stuff that goes down in history, that lives in my mind, you know? Mm-hmm. Like,
very much
I just love it.
And especially with because here's one of those things where, like, other media has really helped me. Part of, I think, that fencing match is that from Leia's perspective, she can get away with this. And this is, like, if you watch Star Wars Rebels, really underlines it, because there, there's a couple times where she shows up and is very clear that like she can, as long as she's not openly, outwardly supporting the rebellion, she can get away with almost anything because she has senatorial privilege and princess privilege. Like, you know, she has that like diplomatic immunity. And one of the things I love about this movie is kind of like watching her think she has that, and then it's taken away from her. And that's, I think, a big part of her journey in this.
That's very true, yeah.
Yeah. Aaron, what about you? What's something you loved?
I think, and I mean, I think we'll get into this more later, but for me, it's just the core three.
Yeah.
Like, I just love the introduction to Luke. Like,
It's just Wookiee
that
erasure.
shot. What'd you...
He said it's Wookiee erasure.
This is Wookiee erasure. Core 3.
I'm so sorry.
Android erasure, honestly.
Okay,
Wow.
the
How
core
humanist of you.
6.
How humanist
One
of you.
person, one person gives medals, 2 people get medals. That's the core 3.
Yeah, why did Chewie not get a medal, actually?
I actually have a story. I can answer that. But do you want me to answer it now, or do you want to finish your bit first?
I mean, yeah, I didn't have too much to say. I wrote in my notes just like Carrie's presence and her tone of voice. I can't quite remember if that's exactly what her speaking tone is or if she lowered it a little bit, but it is so fucking powerful. Yeah. Like, that is a 19-year-old full-grown woman on the screen who is sitting there standing up to Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin with no bra. Like, she is ready to fight. And even though the no bra is creepy Lucas, you know, it's kind of like a woman empowerment moment these days. Because I'm like, okay, girl, go off. Fight these battles. And you're comfortable.
And, like, this is true even now. And I'll be the first to say, like, you know, Star Wars has not always been great about having enough women characters. Recently, we're starting to fix that. But particularly for 1977, to have the damsel in distress character actually help in her own rescue and, like, backtalk the people who are trying to rescue her and tell them how stupid they were, and she has to take over, like, that was not what was normal.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that to me is another thing I really love. I love you pointing that out.
I agree. Oh, so
Yeah,
to
go
answer
ahead,
your
answer the
question,
Wookiee
Aaron,
question.
so they've actually written like a backstory to kind of fill that in, and basically like in Wookiee culture, they don't care about medals. Like, it's just not like something, like they don't need actual trophies of any kind that are like metallic. They don't mean anything. Like, all, you know, for Wookiee, it's just about honor and about, you know, I did this and, you know, thank you for honoring me, etc. And the reason that Maz gives the medal back to Chewie, and that's a powerful moment in the sequels, is not because he didn't get a medal in the first place, but because it was Han's medal that Leia held on to all that time after he died. And so it was like, this is a lasting memory of your best friend. Like, that is why it's an emotional moment. It's not because, like, he didn't get a medal. I mean, sure, like, that can kind of count, but, like, medals don't mean anything to Wookiees. It's a sentimental vibe behind it being Han's that makes that impactful in the sequels.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because, I mean, and it does fill in with what we know about Wookiees, that they wouldn't be a materialistic people.
Exactly.
Like, they live in the trees, they, you know, ball out on Kashyyyk, but they don't really have much for possessions that we've ever seen. So that makes sense. And that,
And I'm
like,
sure, from
the
a
only
practical
reason...
standpoint, they didn't want the 7-foot-tall Peter Mayhew to have to kneel down in his Wookiee costume to have the medal placed upon his giant hairy neck. So,
Good
Yeah,
point.
I was gonna say that's what you're talking about is a great tradition that we'll talk about a lot, where they definitely didn't do that in the movie for that reason, but they created a reason later.
oh,
you
dude,
know?
Star Wars.
Yeah.
My not hot take, my overall take on all of Star Wars is they are the masters at filling in plot holes later.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
At backfilling, oh my god, the backfilling that goes on.
Sometimes well,
one
and
line.
sometimes not.
You fought in the Clone Wars, an entire 10-year show to fill in one line of dialogue from A New Hope. Like, they are the masters.
Literally. I love nothing more than hearing what, like, Matthew, what did you think the Clone Wars was when you heard that? Are you imagining a bunch of clones fighting each other? Are you imagining, like, what do you see in your head?
So this is going to get into the thing that I didn't love rewatching the movie, and it's something that where
Look at that segue.
and again, I don't know if this is a critique of to me this isn't a critique of the movie. This is where I think, like you said, I think they're the masters at it in that they do it all the time. I don't think they do it very well, and I do think that this movie establishes a number of things that I think the prequels then kind of shat all over, which I don't love. Certainly because to me the Clone Wars when I heard that phrase, what I thought of was like a 30 or 40 year period of time during which lots of different people were using clones, and there was all sorts of different wars happening, and it was like just, you know, kind of like the 100 Years' War, like, you know, like all, you know, it like this epic period of time. Certainly I did not think of the clones as like going to be on the good guys' side, and all that kind of thing. But that isn't really the one that bothers me as much as one of the things that I think this movie really establishes, and this is one of the, well, we'll talk about this more when we talk about the prequels, but one of my favorite lines is the person talking to Vader about, like, you know, your sad devotion to that ancient religion hasn't given you the fortitude to conjure up the stolen data tapes. Great dialogue. But according to the Clone Wars, every man in that room would have served alongside the Jedi during the Clone Wars, which were 19 years ago. Mm-hmm. So sad devotion to an ancient religion. Like, to me, I think the impression this movie always gave me was that, like, the hunting down of the Jedi had begun generations ago, and been a lot. And like Anakin was one of the last ones who was finally, like, you know, wiped out by Vader or something like that. And it's, you know, it's not. There's a lot of these little things, and similar, like, you know, when we last met, I was but the student. Now I am the master. To me, Kenobi, like, there was. We'll talk about it when we talk about Kenobi, but that line also, I'm like, oh, why didn't you honor that line? I know the reasons why we can say, oh, it's from a certain point of view, that fight, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think that there's just... I'm generally very negative on prequels in general, because I think it's often very hard to fill that kind of stuff in, and I do think the prequels do mostly a good job. But yeah, that was the one... For me, it's always the hard part watching this movie, is like, I think the Clone Wars is a fantastic show. I think a lot of the prequels is fantastic. I think they told really great stories. I think they don't really line up with what was set up in this movie.
That's valid.
To your point, Matthew, just want a quick note. I think it's interesting. The thing that kind of bothers me overall in Star Wars is they pick and choose what they want to adhere to. Like, you know, it personally, and we can talk about this when we talk about Kenobi, that one line, it doesn't bother me because I see it from that other point of view. But like in episode 3, there's one offhand joke on the bridge where Anakin and Grievous first meet each other, and you know, I expected you to be taller, I expected you to be, you know, and it's like, it's such a throwaway dumb joke. And because of that one line, Anakin and Grievous have no interactions in the entire Clone Wars show, and that could have been such a cool, like, interactions to have throughout that show, but just to keep that one line preserved, yet they're okay throwing away lines from the originals. That is why they never meet Aaron, because of that one throwaway line.
I never knew that.
But just because on the bridge he goes, Anakin Skywalker, I assumed that with your reputation it would be a bit older. General Grievous, you're shorter than I expected. That line prevented any interaction in the Clone Wars. Yet they're willing to throw away all these other lines in the original. So it's annoying they pick and choose.
Yeah. I never realized that because Ahsoka fights Grievous.
Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan and Grievous are the foil. Like, they fight all the time. Anakin will fight Ventress, he'll fight Dooku, he will never fight Grievous. He'll never even see Grievous.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's weird.
So cool.
The one other little thing like that I'll mention, and I'm going to critique one of my absolute favorite movies here, like, the collection of people around that table is so good.
You are in.
Particularly the one that is so, like, you know, oh, this Death Star is the most powerful thing in the universe. I wish, even if they had to recast him, I wish that person had showed up in Rogue One.
Yeah.
Because that is so about just Krennic, and then it's like, where do all these other people suddenly come from?
Yeah.
So that's the only thing. What about you all? What
my, like, things that I didn't love, or honestly, just I have, like, a list of just little things I never really noticed before, but just little but kind of major plot holes in my mind. Like, one of the big ones is that no one seems to freaking remember R2. Ben bought the same droid twice. Obi-Wan, I don't seem to remember owning a droid. You fought with R2 through a war. You know Anakin's droid. Like, no one seems to remember R2-D2 for some reason. And it's just,
also,
it's just silly to me. Also, like, even though the From a Certain Point of View book kind of discussed it a bit, C-3PO and R2-D2 go in completely opposite directions, yet they happen to be caught by the same Jawa crew that brings them to the same people. There's just a lot of very convenient things. I also wrote down here. Hold on, where was it? Something that actually is weird to me, and I'm curious what your take on this, Matthew, is, especially since you've loved this movie so much. When the famous line, these are not the droids you're looking for, Obi-Wan's using the mind trick on one stormtrooper, but then everyone around him just goes with it. Is he using? Do we think he's using a mass mind trick, or like my headcanon, the other stormtroopers are just like these 20-year-old guys who are like, whatever, I don't care. Less paperwork for me. Like it feels silly to me. Like as a kid, I was like, that's such a badass line, and as an adult, I'm like, you tricked one guy, but there's 5 other troopers around. Yep. How is no one intervening here? What's your take on that?
I had the exact same thing. My headcanon for it is that he is speaking quietly enough that no one else hears or sees this stormtrooper, and so when the stormtrooper repeats the lines, all the other troops are just listening to that one stormtrooper. Oh, they're not the droids we're looking for. Okay, we're fine. But the way it's shot, it doesn't make any sense.
Right, right.
Real quick,
yes.
Matthew, you're right. Obi-Wan's astromech is R4.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's and again, I remember when that came out. There's all the poor R4.
Yeah.
It gets forgotten.
Just a few more little things that bothered me real quick. Vader getting knocked away at the end of the movie is maybe the silliest thing in all of Star Wars. The Millennium Falcon comes out of freaking nowhere. And then the one TIE fighter just bonks the wing and he flips out of the deep trench into space and just keeps spinning, and that's how Vader escapes. Not
he keeps spinning even after the Death Star explodes.
Right, the Death Star's gone, and all you see Vader do, no comment on the whole Death Star being blown up. He just goes. I'm picturing in my head Anakin looking confused as hell in a little ship, but I'm like, he's described as the best starfighter pilot in the galaxy. We know how talented Anakin is as a pilot. It would have made more sense for him to try evade or something, but it just felt so silly to have him just get bonked out of the way, and that's how Vader survived that whole encounter.
I will say I actually wrote down something that I liked about that same thing, is that I liked that Vader was out there in a TIE fighter.
Oh, me too.
Whereas Tarkin is like, let me chill on the bridge. Haha, I don't need an escape shuttle. The only reason Vader lives is because he leads by example. Mm-hmm. Which also, maybe he's overconfident and cocky.
Tangent, but that gets into a great question that I have about this movie. If you can think about just this movie, nothing that comes out, who is the primary antagonist? Is it Vader or Tarkin?
Oh, God.
Because I think it's Tarkin.
I think it's
Tarkin. So before we know there's an emperor, I think that the assumption is that Tarkin is the leader, because he gives the energy of I am the master of this ship, of this Death Star. And he even commands Vader of Vader, release him. And Leia goes, Tarkin, I should have known you were holding Vader's leash. It gives the energy of Tarkin being the big bad, which I think makes his death even more shocking to people in that movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's to me, I think it very much is that Tarkin is the big bad, and Vader is the antagonist's attack dog.
Yeah.
And who just then goes, I think that when people think about this movie, they think of it being Vader as the main big bad, but I think we forget just Tarkin is a phenomenal villain. I agree. Peter Cushing, I think, is so good in this role, and he clearly hated it. I think he wanted nothing to do with future movies. Him and Alec Guinness apparently would talk about being on the British stage doing Shakespeare and how the hell did we come to this? But also apparently his shoes were too tight.
Yes,
somehow. So he wound up being barefoot. Was why
he wore pink slippers.
That's it. Yes,
he hated wearing the military boots because they were too tight in his feet. You're right, Matthew. So he wore slippers. So if you go on Google later and look up photos of Peter Cushing, during the filming of this movie, he is dressed like everyone else. Then he's in shorts and pink slippers at his feet.
I love it.
If I may, I have a few more quick little notes, and I will yield the floor. I promise. I think that something else that kind of bothered me. I'll just mention the CGI edition. Obviously, is just terrible. It just ruins, especially in Mos Eisley above all else. It just ruins the feel of that scene so much, and just is so. And it's especially distracting, when they pull up to the stormtroopers for that whole "there's not the droids you're looking for" moment, and the giant CGI lizard creature moves in front of the camera. I'm like, bro, what are we doing here? Like, I get Lucas wanted to, like, bring it into the 21st century or whatever, but he just did it poorly. I also
I just fast forward through the Jabba scene.
It's the worst.
I'm going to read a lot about... I have a lot to say about how awful that is when we get to that movie. Don't worry. Mm-hmm. The Jabba scene... I'm sorry. I thought you meant the palace scene in episode 6. You mean just Jabba in general not being a human anymore? And him stepping on Jabba's tail?
No, I just mean the Jabba scene. Jabba the Hutt does not show up in A New Hope. Like,
yeah.
Right.
He's not.
Well, they filmed him as a human
Han shoots
originally.
first. Yeah.
Do you know that, Aaron? So initially Jabba was a human, like just a fat human, and that's why when Han walks behind him, like they have to like make it so he's stepping on Jabba's tail. Originally he was just walking behind him, and he says, "Jabba, you're a beautiful human being."
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just and it also it was
it
cut
just
from the
comes out
original
as
movie, and they put it back
sarcastic.
in there with the CGI slug. It was dumb. Two or three more quick things. Insulting Vader so openly, I feel like no one would do that. Like, throughout the movies, Vader's feared so intensely, and then this one guy on the bridge there just starts roasting Vader. That felt like very, like, I don't know, unbelievable to me. And I think that for the movie at the time, it makes total sense. Like, I think that actually, really interestingly, I read a take one time about this, that, like, for those who kind of know a little bit about world history, Rasputin was, like, this, like, wizard guy in Russia during the Tsars, and, like, he wasn't actually a wizard, but he had this weird, creepy aura to him, and I feel like that's what Vader kind of was. It's this weird mystic guy to all these people, and then as the more movies were made and the story progresses, he becomes this more evil, villainous being that is more feared, but I don't think they found exactly what they wanted Vader to be in that movie yet, and it kind of throws me off, because they changed what they wanted him to be just one movie later.
Yeah.
I guess to me, that's where I think that strong idea of the Force being this like ancient thing, that it's like, people have read hundreds of years ago about the Jedi, and here's this one guy who, again, remember, there's no word, the Sith was a word that didn't exist yet, like, is a dark Jedi or whatever you want to call it. So I think to me that in that context it works, but yeah, with everything else that we now know, it doesn't hold up.
Also, they have Han say a really sexist line in the movie I never picked up on before, and it really annoyed me. He said, after they get out of the trash compactor, he says, "All right, now if we can avoid any more female advice, we can get moving here." And I was like, making him a scoundrel, I get it, like it kind of features the scoundrel thing, but I was like, I never really heard him say something that outwardly sexist, I felt like, and I was like, could have done without that, personally.
Yeah. You could just say, "I don't want her advice anymore," without being
exactly,
so general,
exactly.
to be at least a lot less sexist.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I'll mention is, this just bothered me ever since I was a kid. The stormtroopers are looking for the droids while Obi-Wan and Luke are in the cantina, and they knock on a door. "This one's locked. Move along. Move on." I'm sorry. If law enforcement in the entire world just said, "Door's locked. That's it. We're done. Move on to the next thing." What kind of what? What? Like, it's just such a that makes no sense to me in that context of, like, and then, like, 2 seconds later, they open the door and leave. And it's so unbelievable to me in that moment. And I'm like, I don't know. So to me, it's nothing. The actual movie as a whole, there's nothing I actively really dislike about it. It's just that there's so many little things that feel so silly to me. And I get it, as Star Wars fans, we've kind of just accepted those as quirks that, like, make us love the movies more. And I do love it for that. But if I'm looking at it with a critical eye, I'm like, George, come on, brother. Like, what are we doing here?
And I think it's helpful to point them out because, again, like, I think we both love the movie, but, like, I do think, like, as much as I am a defender of the originals and a lover of the originals, there are people who will be like, "Oh, look at all this silly stuff about Rey and, like, how Rey could do all this stuff," not like the original movies. Like, dude, Obi-Wan trains Luke for 6 hours?
If that.
And then he's able to be this, like, and yes, he's supposed to be a decent pilot, but, like, he's able to, like, use the Force to do this impossible thing. Like, if there's any such thing as a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu, it is Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
And all the just silly, like, there are silly things in all these movies. So yeah, no, I think it's good to point out. Aaron, what didn't work for you?
Yeah, I mean, overall, like, I kind of love this movie. Most of what you guys have said, I agree with. Like, just the little things of, like, okay, there's a ton of stormtroopers. Why do you all just go with what the one said? Or, like, that door is not locked. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
You can get it opened.
How about only stormtroopers are so precise?
Oh my god, yeah, of course.
That
But one thing-
sends me.
Yeah, it's a good laugh. One thing that kind of, and you touched on it with, like, why does nobody remember R2? Why does C-3PO not remember R2?
Oh, no,
Or Tatooine?
Episode 3, they literally say, like,
wipe his
have the
memory?
protocol's memory droid
Yeah.
wiped. Because
Okay.
3PO can talk, and everyone can understand him, versus R2, not everyone can understand him, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
speaks binary.
Now,
That
why
makes sense.
R2 doesn't remember all this is something we'll be discussing more in our bonus section, because the story in From a Certain Point of View is going to get into that, because that also raises some questions. But again, that's more an episode 3 thing.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really have much else. The Jabba scene is painful. It just is. I wish it wasn't there. I mean, yeah, I guess the complaint, why is it remastered? Why can we not have the original version on Disney Plus? Not everyone has a VHS player. Like, ugh.
So, I love the original trench scene. But wow, it's bad. Like,
I don't know.
Have you the unremastered one where, like, you can see the TIE fighters, like, jerking in air as, like, the people pulling their strings are moving them?
Yeah.
And it's like they had one model of one X-Wing that breaks apart in the exact same way, and every single shot of an X-Wing explosion breaks apart. Like, I do think they improved something. Like, I had a sort of, like, that's my dumb space battle, and I love it about those things.
The trench one, I was okay. Like, the CGI isn't, like, it isn't as noticeable, like, I mean, it's noticeable in a positive way. It's not as noticeable in, like, a distracting way. I think where CGI really messes up in A New Hope is mostly in Mos Eisley and around the cantina scene. Like, there's just, it's just unnecessary and distracting additions.
Yeah, it's the animals.
Yeah.
Mainly.
Yeah.
Also, did y'all notice, I noticed this for the first time, that there are seatbelts around the Djarik table on the Millennium Falcon? I never
I've seen
noticed
that
that. And then they sit down and Obi-Wan puts on this big-ass seatbelt, and I was like, that is so silly. That is so silly. And it gave me a good giggle.
That's funny.
I do like it.
I did love the crate dragon skeleton, just seeing that and being like, that's where it came from. Like, I had known that at some point, but I kind of forgot about it. And when I saw it again, I was like, it's a crate dragon, which nobody knew for another 40 years or 30 years or however long.
There's a Star Wars fan who is like salvaged pieces of that and then sells them, and I have a little tiny piece of the original Crate Dragon prop right here.
Is amazing. All right, we'll take a
Alex, you're
picture
so
of that
cool.
and include it in the show notes or link to it, because that is phenomenal. I love that.
Love it.
So how do we feel this fits into the kind of overall Star Wars story? And I think I've always said some things about this in terms of, like, my frustrations that the Clone Wars kind of doesn't really line up with it. But I do think, like, there's a lot of things that it really does pay homage to. What do you all think about how it fits into the larger Star Wars story?
Aaron, you go. I've been talking a lot, I feel like.
I mean, that's what podcasts are for, first of all.
What did you say?
That's what podcasts are for. They're for
Okay,
talking.
but I can keep talking if you want, or I can let you go.
You go.
Oh, okay.
I need a moment to collect my thoughts.
Okay, yeah, my ADHD is just go. So I would say for me, I actually think it fits pretty well overall. Like I said, there are little weird fluctuations. I think that what's interesting about it is it sets a lot of, because it's the first one, it sets a lot of precedents that they try to stick with for a while, but then they also, like, diverge from. Like, one thing I noticed that I don't know if anyone's ever really talked about before, well, I'm sure someone has, but did you ever really notice that Obi-Wan is the only Jedi who actually wills himself into the Force? Like, Yoda dies and fades into the Force. Every Jedi we see that fades into the Force dies. They have been killed. They are dead. Then they fade. Obi-Wan, before the lightsaber even make contact with him, wills himself to die and fade into the Force.
And disappear.
And
Not
that's
just
what I'm saying.
die.
Like, yeah, like all one, and like maybe he's just that powerful, but it's just interesting. Like that. That's like a kind of like they took that concept and they like kind of retooled it, and that's what it feels like to me. Is like a microcosm for the movie as a whole. Was a lot of the concepts were laid down, like the Clone Wars, becoming one with the Force, lightsaber training, different Force powers, what Vader's role is in all of this, and then took all of that and then just kind of retooled them to fit the narrative in a more uniform way. Because, again, when Lucas made this, he wasn't sure, is this movie going to be a one-off? Am I ever going to get funded again? Is this just it? And so I think he tried to just kind of go with his gut, and I get that. But then, so I think that, it fits kind of like a puzzle piece that, fits where it's supposed to fit, but it wasn't cut perfectly, so you kind of have to wiggle it and jam it in there for it to actually push down into the puzzle. Which, again, and we'll talk about it later, to me, it's why I think Revenge of the Sith feels more complete to me, Matthew, is because they've done all the retooling, they have all of the retools, and now they're kind of trying to just fit all of it together. And I'm not taking anything away from A New Hope. I think A New Hope,
No, it's fair.
It sets all of this precedent, and the fact that it did that is an incredible feat. But I think that we spend so much of the following content trying to link everything back to this movie that things naturally have to be tweaked or changed, and that makes it hard for it to technically fit when it is the it's the string that everything else branches off of, and you're trying to connect everything back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's go ahead, Aaron.
I was just going to say, I think that's another great example of Star Wars explaining itself in the past. Because that doesn't really make a ton of sense. He's the only one to ever do that. But then with kind of the context of Kenobi, where he spent 19 years in a cave alone with the ghost of Qui-Gon.
He's spent 10 years before he got to the show, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Well,
no, because I'm saying, even after the show.
Okay.
Kenobi show,
Well, he's not in the cave anymore. Remember, he left the cave and got into a hut.
We're getting very deep into.
I'm sorry. I'm a Kenobi defender, too hard to the death, so I get very protective of my boy.
He's in the hut by himself for a long time, and Qui-Gon is with him for part of that time.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, no, I just feel that's a subtle possibility of an explanation of but also, Yoda had a very similar experience of being alone, so maybe that's me just looking for explanations.
I guess for me, and I think this is just a different perspective, and neither one is right or wrong. I agree with you that it doesn't fit, and that the later movies do more to try and make it all fit, and even in the Clone Wars where Yoda explains that it's actually in the prequels somewhere that Yoda explains that Qui-Gon can come back and all this kind of stuff. For me though, I don't want to see the Dungeons and Dragons rules that explain how the magic works. I like there to be mysticism and mystery. And I think if there's one overall flaw that Star Wars has, is that I think sometimes it tries to explain too much of exactly how things work. And to me, the midichlorians is the absolute worst example of this. But I'd say in the same way, I don't want to know what the rules are of how a being fades into the Force. That should just be mystical and magical. And trying to have it all make exact sense doesn't really work for me. Mm-hmm. So I very much hear what you're saying. I think that they didn't do the best job of making it all happen the same way. I think it's just a stylistic difference of, do you want it all to fit, or do you want it to I would rather that it just happened in a couple different ways and no one ever explained it in any way. It was just it's the Force had that kind of thing.
That makes sense.
Maybe not with that sound effect, but
well, that's exactly what Obi-Wan does to scare away the Sand People. Ooh.
I thought he makes the noise of a crate dragon.
What?
That's what he's supposed to, yeah. He's supposed to be mimicking the noise of a crate dragon. That's he's mimicking the Tuscans' only natural predator enemy in the desert.
That makes sense.
Yep.
I just see it as goofy little wizard man. But yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Favorite characters or moments? Aaron, you go first. You said a lot about Leia already, so that's a big thing.
Yeah, that was my one, okay? That was Leia.
No.
Love her and her characterizations. Also, in the past, I feel like I've had kind of the view of Mark Hamill, not a great actor. Like, it takes him some time and training to kick into it. You know, they had 4 years between this and The Empire Strikes Back. But this time through, I paid a little more attention, and I was like, he's not a bad actor, though. Like, I do believe a lot of this, and, like, the subtle emotions, like, yeah, he's not necessarily, it's not an Oscar-winning performance, but it's believable, and I feel like it sets up his story pretty well in a way that I haven't recognized in the past. So I liked kind of re-seeing that. Otherwise, I don't know if I have, like, favorite characters, really, but I just love the Cantina in Mos Eisley. Like, as a Clone Wars nerd and as someone who is all about, like, species, like, I love to just look through Wikipedia and just learn as many different species as I can and what their traits are. Like, Cad Bane's species, like, every bounty hunter or random character, I'm gonna look up the species. Like, during the Mos Eisley Cantina scene, there's a Tal there. It's Tal, Tals, maybe? Talz. And they're featured in, the first season, second season of the Clone Wars as this planet, first season, I think, as this planet, and it's when it's on Pantora's moon, basically. Or wait, no, Pantora is a moon for the planet that the Tals are a native of. And so the Pantorans, since they're a sentient species, are trying to do this, blah, 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 and they're talking about no one's ever seen these, like, warrior creatures before, like, look at all this destruction they've caused. And just to see that they made that whole plot line, this whole incredible species from that one crazy little alien that they made, or just, I just love seeing all the different species and how they tie back to the Clone Wars and things like that.
And they do that a lot. Like, you look at all those species in that cantina, and they like hashed out entire stories for them in the Clone Wars. I feel like a lot of the planets in the Clone Wars were based on, you know, different costume designs that were just made. Like imagine, like, you know, you're some costume designer in 1977. They're like, make some weird alien-looking thing. And then they have an entire storyline 40 years later to describe what that thing is.
Yeah. It is something that my mother used to talk about a lot because she had grown up with a lot of science fiction. She'd watched a lot of Star Trek when it was on in the 60s as an adult, and then other science fiction. And she would talk about how, like, until Star Wars, most aliens just had, like, weird ears and different colored skin. And strange alien customs where the women didn't wear many clothing. Those were the ways you showed, you know, who was alien and stuff. And this was just having so many, like, clearly non-anthropomorphic or, you know, very different than humanoid species was just awesome. And I, just in terms of the way that they, like, keep building on them decades later, there's the one who looks a lot like a hammerhead shark, and I knew him because I had his toy, and in his toy that I bought in, like, 1983, or that was given to me, I was 5, was called the Hammerhead. And then much, much later, they go into the species, who I believe is pronounced Ithorians.
Yep.
And, like, in some of the books, they talk about how people refer to them as hammerheads, but that's a real slur. And, like, they shouldn't be referred. And I just thought that was just such a brilliant little, like, how do we acknowledge that we called them that, but also, like, build this culture that, of course, that's not what they're called. It's like, no, people would call them that because that's what they look like, but that's racist. Don't call them that.
Yeah. I just love it. I love Ithorians. They're such a cool species. And the way that they have, like, this isn't really expanded on in the movies or films that I know of, but they have, like, 3 sets of lungs or something like that, and they can, like, cause temporary deafness by roaring. And that's why they all have a voice modulator, because their natural, like, voice and language is so destructive to human ears.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I love that.
I also like one thing I want to say about the Cantina is that I like to imagine that at some point in his 20 years of exile, Hondo Ohnaka just stumbled into that cantina, and Obi-Wan was there, and they had a drink together in that, quietly in one of the little booths in that cantina. And that's just a headcanon. I have no proof. I don't think anyone's ever said that happened, but I'm just going to believe that happened in my heart.
Yeah.
I like it.
I love it. Oh, real quick, I think I remembered where it's from, actually. So the 2003 Star Wars 2D microseries. It's when Shaak Ti and a bunch of other Jedi are trying to get Palpatine away from the attack on Coruscant, and one of the Jedi is an Ithorian, and he blows a bunch of droids and almost Grievous away with his giant lungs.
Nice.
Dude, that micro series is so good. We should do an episode on that.
We will.
I know that also in the Darth Bane books, which are Legends canon, but still have a lot of good things about them, as long as you, as I said, don't like women characters written well. But they it's really bad. But there's an Ithorian Jedi in that, and part of the idea is that no one can pronounce their name because you can only pronounce their name if you have two different throats.
That's what it is. It's the throats.
Yeah. Alex, what up for you? What are some of your like favorite moments or characters or?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that like character wise, I mean, even though I love Ewan McGregor more because I grew up with him as my Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan Kenobi is my favorite Jedi, and probably my favorite character in Star Wars, either him or Anakin. But Obi-Wan is just like Alec Guinness' performance is incredible, even though he didn't want to be there. And I think I am very drawn to the whole like old master character. That's why I love Yoda, and even in other mediums and films and stories, like and just in that one story to like have this old man who has so much mystery behind him then die without revealing any of the mystery. It like almost drives me crazy, but it like makes me want more. It makes me like it sucks me in because I know eventually I'll get answers. And then from a villain standpoint, I mean Tarkin. I really love Tarkin, and he's one of the characters that I am really pleased that we got to get hashed out more in the Tarkin book, which I'm actually reading right now for the first time. Clone Wars and Rebels, like they really hash out Tarkin's character and how just cold, meticulous, calculating he is. In the Thrawn books even, I mean, like, he is just such a cool villain. And Peter Cushing obviously does him perfectly, and I think that he's probably one of my favorite antagonists of all of Star Wars and doesn't get enough screen time.
Agreed. One of my favorite Clone Wars arcs that we'll get into is when he spends time with Anakin. And like you can see Anakin slowly starting to like emerge because like the two of them are both like, oh, all this senatorial bureaucracy. If we just had one strong person in charge, you know, it's just like, oof.
Dude, the Clone Wars really said Mortis arc, Citadel arc, like go off. The back-to-back arcs there were like peak Clone Wars.
It really was. Yeah, there's so much. And to be clear, like I love what you had to say, Leia. I was just helping reference that. Like have many of these answers for sure. And mostly, I love the cantina scene. To me, is so good. The way so many of these things get referenced. All the stuff about Tarkin that you said, like Vader obviously becomes this incredibly important character, and I love Vader in this, but Tarkin is just so menacing. I think for me, I really, really loved the dynamic between Luke and Han, and it's a dynamic that I think of like, you know, fresh, innocent farm boy and you know, grizzled old, you know, cynic. And it's a very classical one, and it's one that this movie didn't invent, and many more have done it since. But it just works so well for me. And you once mentioned Alex asking if, you know, I have this very strong connection to Luke. I don't think I really connected to Luke until Last Jedi. Like I admired him, but I could never relate to him. But I very much could always relate to Han, especially in terms of being like. I've always had friends who were just not had superpowers, but were just incredibly talented. And I always felt like I was the person who was, if I worked really hard, I could come kind of close to them. And Han is, you know, very smart and very cunning and good at his job, but he's not a Jedi. And he's cynical about things. And I just love him so much because of that. I also just want to say on the Mark Hamill acting, yes, I think Mark Hamill grew out to be a much better actor. But like I said, I think he does fine in this. I think he portrays like, you know, the anger when Obi-Wan is killed and kind of losing himself. And I think he portrays the kind of like spoiled whiny kid. But I just want to go get some power converters. Like that one line is nails on chalkboard. I will fully admit that. And I know other people will sometimes say, like when they defend Anakin in Attack of the Clones, of like he is doing an accurate portrayal of a whiny teenager. That may be true. I don't want to spend time. When I was a whiny teenager, I tried to spend my time around adults because I didn't like myself and I didn't like anyone else. I don't find whiny teenagers pleasant to be around. And so, yeah. But I thought Mark Hamill was fine. But clearly Mark Hamill's acting chops, I think he does a good job portraying, and I think he's fantastic Return of the Jedi. But if you're going to give me like Mark Hamill's most iconic role is probably Luke Skywalker or the Joker. Mark Hamill's best acting roles, I don't think Luke Skywalker's in the top 5.
Yeah.
What I'll say about Mark Hamill, that I'll give a slight defense of Mark here, in that I think that.
Oh, I thought I was defending him, but okay, go ahead.
But
Double
I'll give an extra defense then. What I'm going to say is that I feel like, unlike Leia, who was raised in this royal house and raised to be refined and and she comes off as being like sharp as a tack. Mm-hmm. Luke was raised on a moisture farm in the middle of a desert, basically, and by 2 farmers. And he didn't have any experience with the outside world. And I feel like you see that just kind of lost, confused teenager who has dreams in that movie. And then you see him grow really, like the acting grows as the character grows. And to me, it makes sense. And I think I really actually appreciate that. And I think that for me, he really takes off in his acting on Dagobah in episode 5, because without getting into detail, because we will discuss it, but he went into, those scenes by himself with a puppet. Like Frank Oz was there, but you couldn't see him. So it's just Mark Hamill talking to a puppet, and he had to act like that for weeks on end. And I feel like that really that was the moment that he kind of went from a fine actor to all right, this is Luke Skywalker right here.
I will point out that you are now committing the crime that you accused Aaron of droid erasure, because there was a electronic box sitting next to Mark Hamill.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I do mostly agree with you there. I think that was great acting.
You're right. R2 did beep a little bit. You're right.
All right.
On that kind of, just real quick,
yeah,
I played this Star Wars mobile game called Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. And they have a bunch of different versions of each character, right? And so one of the first characters you get when you start the game is Farm Boy Luke. And he's kind of a shitty character, not that effective, really. But you need to gear him up in order to get, Commander Luke Skywalker. Mm-hmm. And so just seeing them so differently separated, in my mind, it's just oh, yeah, well, that's Farm Boy Luke. Farm Boy Luke is a baby boy. He's a little man with no ability to handle things. I feel like he throws little temper tantrums, at the start of the movie, and then, grows out of it. I don't know.
He grows
That's
up.
the way I kind of see it.
Yeah.
So there's so much more we could say about this movie, obviously, so much more that we probably will reference it in future discussions, but I want to start wrapping up with just kind of last thoughts. I'm just going to say my last thought. You guys talked about how, there were some movies your parents wanted you to watch or wanted you to wait until you watched, which it's always funny to me because my parents were probably too permissive, but I could just watch anything whenever I wanted. That's a whole other story about my psyche and trauma. But, I forget sometimes. I think, again, because, Aaron, like you said, you watch it too young to realize things are supposed to bother you. This is a gruesome movie. There is a severed arm that our hero dismembered someone, and, you see the severed arm on the floor. And, when you get back to see, Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen dead, they're burning corpses, skeletons, where, most of their flesh has already burned off, is sitting there. And then you see, dead Jawas being just, dumped onto a fire.
That was something I've never noticed before.
Right? I think it was I think if I'd watched this movie when I was, 7, I would have been either ah! Or that's metal. But, because I just watched it as a kid so often, I never noticed it. And then, I remember one time when I, watched it again, probably when I was, in my 20s, and I was oh, that's a burning skeleton corpse right there. That's a little brutal.
Did you know that the original Star Wars had a G rating until they included that scene?
Yeah.
The skeletons?
Yeah. It wasn't in the very, very original cut, and then they added it, and so it could no longer be G. It had to be PG.
Yeah.
Wow.
Back when you could have a G movie that wasn't a Disney animated movie.
Yeah.
So, in my final thoughts, I want to just offer 2 things that I didn't really find a space to just mention. One is that, well, I guess I probably should have mentioned this in the noticed it portion, but in the cantina, I don't know if you'll ever notice this, but the bartender obviously hates droids and kicks them out. Do you ever notice that behind the bar there are IG heads or what's holding the liquid?
Mm-hmm.
What?
He hates droids, so it's like a hunter's bar. He's using the heads of the droid to hold the. And I thought that was like a really cool detail of like I hate droids so much I'm using them as like a utensil here. And so I think my final thoughts related to that are there's so many little details in this movie. Sometimes I'll just pause in the cantina or I'll pause in Obi-Wan's hut and just look around the whole frame at like little details and things that I didn't notice in the past. And that's what I really love about Star Wars as a whole. And I think this movie really embodies that of like there's so much lore and so much background in depth to every character and every scene that you really get to explore more no matter how many times you've seen the movie, which I really appreciate. And the very last thing I want to end with, because there was no other point for me to mention this, but I think it's very cool, is, and we can put photos of this in the show notes, but this is basically a replica of Luke's lightsaber, correct? Yeah? This was based off, and this whole prop was made from the flash tube of old speed graphic cameras. So that's what this is. And so They took this, and they just slapped on a few extra pieces, and that's how they made the first lightsaber. And as a photographer, I think that's super cool that they took a flash tube with, from a photo item. I don't know what to describe it as.
A professional photographer right here, guys.
What do you say? Yeah, photographer. A photo item, an accessory, and then turned it into the beginning of the greatest weapon in cinematic history.
I do love that. I love that you think that, like, you can hold up a particular lightsaber and I'll identify it as Luke's. Like, that's just not the kind of fan I am. That's not the detail I pay attention to.
Sorry, Anakin's lightsaber.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
It's Anakin to Luke to Rey.
I think you're proving my point for me. But yes, just though on the subject of the like weird things that get used, after protocol droids and astromechs, easily my favorite droid is the Gronk droid, which we get introduced to in this movie, made out of trash cans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which I love.
So, Aaron, what are your final thoughts to wrap us up?
John Williams.
Oh, yeah. How do we not even get into that?
Slayed this entire film. Like, oh my God. From the opening goosebumps to the closing mind-blowing, like, trill of music. Just like, I had written down several musical points. Like, Vader's first entrance coming through the smoke. And it's not quite the Imperial March that plays. Or, like, it doesn't start as the Imperial March. There's, like, some other little mysterious thing that they do for him that I just loved. And then also when Ben Kenobi takes his hood off and it goes like, boo-doo. Like, it was just a perfect... The music just furthers the storytelling so much. And I think as years go on, like, of course, composers are incredible and that's, like, still a thing. But just something about this particularly is just so good.
It's funny. We were talking before about, like, what holds up and what doesn't and what they've paid homage to. And the music is, like, I don't think there is a single Star Wars property, like maybe individual episodes, but if you take, like, look through every episode of a season, look through every movie, etc., where there isn't at least one sound cue or one, like, little theme of music that isn't straight from this particular movie. Because there are just so many themes, and then also from the other two of the originals, but the fact that they just keep, the Force music, the Empire music, Vader's theme, there are all of these themes that are set up, and then more in the next two that we just keep going back to and back to. And if you think about it, some of my absolute favorite moments from Star Wars are when, like, we'll be in a story 30 years later or 30 years beforehand that will just, just that one little strip of music will be like, okay, yeah, here's where you're saying that Ahsoka's a Jedi because you're playing the Force music, or Rey is a Jedi because this music's playing, and it's just so perfect.
Music. I feel we could have an entire episode on John Williams and the music and how it really ties everything together. I mean, like you said, even in the Clone Wars, you hear the faint background of, like, the Imperial March around Anakin sometimes when he's doing something really dark, and connecting the sequels to the originals when, like, when you have a moment with Yoda coming back in The Last Jedi, and you hear that same music you heard when Yoda inspires Luke on Dagobah, and it really links everything together in such a beautiful way. And it makes me so happy that John got to do the music and the original scores for all 9 movies, and rightfully so is considered one of the greatest composers of all time, not just for Star Wars, but for his breadth of work. But thank you for bringing him up, Aaron, because he is such an integral part. Like, Star Wars would not be Star Wars without John Williams.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed I didn't mention it. So yeah,
I am
very-
also
Why I'm here,
embarrassed.
guys, to embarrass you.
All right. Well, Aaron, with that, we can find more things of you embarrassing your elders, where I promise I'll stop making fun of Aaron's age and her making fun of my age. But we're the Generations
won't.
podcast.
I make no
There's-
promises.
There we go. Okay, Aaron, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm a cosplayer. I do a lot of cosplay things under Lady Tano Creates, both on Instagram and TikTok. Yeah, you'll find videos of me making progress, backsliding on my projects, the ups and downs. Occasionally I do TikTok sounds too, in cosplay. And then Instagram is just, I'm a lot more active on there, like on my stories and stuff, just with upcoming things. I do a lot of polls because I'm horrible at decision making. So I'm like, I've recently decided I want to start cosplaying Mystique from X-Men. And I was like, guys, should I do body paint or a bodysuit? And everyone's like, body paint. And I was like, you all hate me, but thank you.
And Aaron's also going to be cosplaying Shin soon.
Yes. Yeah, I'm in the process of making a Shin cosplay.
Aaron does look
sorry.
just like Shin, basically, so.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, that was kind of long-winded. But yeah, Lady Tano Creates. Come check me out.
Awesome.
Alex?
Mr. Corman.
Yeah, you can find. So I'm a photographer, photojournalist, and when I'm not podcasting, so you can find me on Instagram at AlexCorman12. That's KORMANN, the number 12. And also my website, if you want to look more at my photography, is AlexCormanPhoto.com. It's a whole mix of stuff. It's mostly, I'm a photojournalist, but I do everything, including some cons. I've done photos of Erin in her cosplay, and I'll do more in the future, hopefully. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And of course, I am the Ethical Panda. You can find me at theethicalpanda.com, is where you can find all the different podcasts that we do here. But also, I'm very proud to announce that we're now starting to build social media for Star Wars Generations. By the time this gets launched, all of them will be up and going, but I know we have our Twitter account is, if you search for Star Wars Generations, you should find it, but it is, I think, officially at SW Generations. Our Instagram is SW Generations Pod. We haven't decided it's SW Generations Pod or Star Wars Generations Pod, but we will have decided by the time it's live, so you can look in the show notes and find it. Hopefully we're going to be setting up a Gmail so that you can send us emails and all that kind of stuff. All that will be in the show notes. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your notes and your thoughts. Of course, members get to hear our bonus content where we're going through the book from a certain point of view. We'll also do other things occasionally in the member content, but for $5 a month, you get access to that. You get access to ad-free content, and you certainly more than anything get to help support us. It helps us keep the lights on, helps us keep bringing you great content. So on behalf of myself, Aaron, and Alex, if you are not sticking around to the member content, thank you so much for listening. We have spoken.
Stay classy, Tatooine.
May the Force be with you.
And also with you.
Aaron just changes
Thank you.
every time.
I can't think of a good
I
one.
think
so
that should be your
just-
bit, is you say
whatever
something
comes to
completely different
mind.
every time.
I'm okay with that.